vent his frustration. And so he says, I'm going to vent my frustration. That's his therefore. I'm going to say what I need to say, what I want to say. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit, and I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Listen, the Bible does talk about Philippians chapter 2, doing all things without murmuring and complaining. The children of Israel in the wilderness, for their murmuring and complaining, were condemned. But that does not condemn all complaining. That does not condemn all frustration. You don't want to let complaining dominate who you are. But, good grief. Sometimes, you got to get it out somehow. You got to get it outside of you. You got to, I don't know for other people, but for me, it's just like information or interactions or stressful things, they just spin in my head. And my head just kind of plays them, and they just kind of loop and loop and loop and loop and loop. So I've either got to do multiple things. I've either got to call and talk to one of my friends and say, look, this is what's going on, and just get it out of my head, or sit down with a notebook and my pen and just write it out. But either way, you're getting it out of your head. You're getting it off the hamster wheel, so to speak, and putting a stop to it and letting it come out. And there is a place for that. And I think that's why a good portion of the Psalms are just that. When you look at the prayer book of Israel, one of the things they're doing to God is they're offering their complaints. They're just laying them out in front of Him. They're processing life in front of Him. And there are some things, I think it's normal to have a complaint. Is that different than being a complainer? Yes. One's a lifestyle. One is a frustrating momentary circumstance. And that's something we have to understand. And that goes back to simply holding the Bible in tension and seeing what it says all across the board and not just in certain places. I thought Christopher Ashe had a great statement here that was very helpful. He says, if I can read my own writing, one of the sure signs of hope in Job is that he must speak. And it is precisely by speaking that Job is going to argue, cajole, and almost preach himself toward the truth. Okay? That is, he's going to talk it out. Now, I don't know, that's for some people a personality thing. Some people want to talk stuff to death. Okay? I don't. I want to work through it myself, whether it's talking with myself and reasoning through it, or talking it with somebody I trust, but I don't want to hash it, and I don't want to beat it into the ground. But I do want to talk it out, write it out, do something, because that forces me to at least process it. So it loses its dominance. And what Ashe is saying here, Christopher Ashe is saying in his commentary, is when Job is speaking, he's not shutting down, because we have a tendency when we struggle to shut down. And if you shut down, the struggle's not going anywhere, and it's going to continue to pile on more and more and more and more. And so, in essence, what happens when you have a vessel that's holding something and there's no way for it to escape, and you keep pouring? It's going to run over. If it's in a somewhat closed environment, it's going to bust it. And so being able to think through it and to talk through it and to process it is important. And that's what Job is saying. I'm doing that. This is part of the process. And that's the thing, too, that we've talked about, is that Job's friends are more concerned with trying to preach him a sermon than they are with trying to let him just be him and let him work through his struggles. Okay? And, sometimes, there are certain friends that you have that with, and there are certain friends you don't have that with. I have several close friends, but truthfully and honestly, there is only one of them that I trust to tell him anything that crosses my mind. There's only one of them. Because I know he's not going to look at me funny. He's not going to judge me. He's not going to think you shouldn't say that. He's not going to try and correct me. He's just going to let me be frustrated. He's going to let me, and not that my other friends who are very close and very good to me, not that they don't, it's just different. And maybe if I thought about it for a long time, I maybe could come up with a reason. But either way, learning to let people process, and that's what Job is saying. I only get one life. You want me to take what has happened to me, the tragedy that's happened to me, and just pretend it didn't happen? No. I'm going to speak my frustration. All right. Somebody read for us verses. Let's do 12 through the end of the chapter, 12 to 21. It's poetry, so it's not very long reading.
Am I a sea or a sea serpent, that you sit guard over me? When I say my bed will comfort me, my couch relieves my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. I long my life. I would not live forever, let me alone, for my days are but a breath. What is man, that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? How long will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be.
Okay. So he says, am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me? Okay, so the sea, I think it's Jeremiah, maybe some of the other prophets, but Jeremiah definitely speaks of God creating a boundary for the sea. Okay, the beaches, they serve as a boundary, and they cannot transgress that boundary. And so God is saying, okay, am I the sea that you have to put a boundary on? Or Job is saying, am I a sea that you put a boundary on me, or a sea monster, which is the idea of certain creatures, and we'll get into it later on in the book with Leviathan and Behemoth. Am I a sea creature that you have to set a special watch over me? You have to, in essence, kind of always keep a watchful eye on me. And that will become clearer here as you watch this unfold in just a minute. So he says, he's going to kind of explain what he means by that. He feels like God is bearing down on him. He says, verse 13, when I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. So again, he goes back to what he said previously in this chapter. When I think, you know what, I think I'm finally at the point where I can go to sleep. But I go to sleep and I have nightmares. And so we talked about that, I think, last week, the sense of feeling trapped. In the daytime, the pain is just so real and so mind-numbing, it controls him, and he thinks, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. Some nights he can't sleep. The nights that he does get to sleep, he wakes up in a panic. And so it's that feeling of being trapped. And so he says this is how bad it is, so that I would choose strangling and death rather than my bones. Now, the idea behind strangling, I think our minds automatically run to well, I may say more about my mind than anybody else's. It may run to like a serial killer type thing. But I think the idea behind strangling here is more of, Job probably had like coughing fits that could very easily take his breath and leave him gasping. I think, and look, asthma and some of those things are very serious. I mean, even Edwin Stanton, who served as the Secretary of War, under Abraham Lincoln. He died from an asthma attack. He just couldn't get under control. And so what he's saying is, I would rather just not be able to recover from that and die rather than continue on this hamster wheel of suffering and grief. And so he says in verse 16, I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are a breath. Now those are hard words to read and to really think about when he says, I hate my life. I hate it. And then he looks at God and says, just leave me alone. He looks at, and when you're struggling with something and the problem just won't go away, sometimes in a moment of frustration, you're not even really wanting, it's not like you're talking to your problem, but you are. You just, in frustration, go, just leave me alone. Like, just stop for a minute. Give me a break. So then he says this in verses 17 and 18, which sound very similar to a psalm. He says, what is man that you should make so much of him and set your heart on him? Visit him every morning and test him every moment. Now, what's interesting is this phrase is very similar to Psalm 8 and verse 4. When David is considering God and his goodness, he says, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you would visit or render assistance to him? And in there, he's in amazement and wonder that God thinks upon mankind and treats him so well. Here, Job is saying just the opposite. Just the opposite. Okay? What is man that you make so much of him, that you set your heart on him, visit him every morning, and test him every moment? So in essence, Job is saying, it's like you have it out for me. You have it out for me. Now look, there are people who have been through immense suffering. And it's just like constantly hit. I think about one lady I knew in Kentucky, and the challenges that she faced and still faces of a loss, and then a betrayal, and then a health issue, and then another health issue, and then another health issue. Look, when that kind of stuff starts piling up, you start to look at it and think, there are more people in the universe other than me. Maybe we could shift this to some of them. And look at what happened to Job. You could see how he gets there, right? He loses everything. Then he loses his health, loses his wife, loses all different types of things. And he can kind of feel like, maybe God is picking on me a little bit. Why can't other people bear their fair share of it? And so he says, verse 19, how long will you not look away from me, nor leave me alone till I swallow my spit? And so basically what he's saying is, God, could you look away from me and give me just a second of time this long to just swallow my spit and catch my breath and just have 1 minute, one handful of seconds where I'm not dominated by this? He says, if I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of mankind? Why have you made me your mark? See that? Your mark. I feel like I'm your target and you're just coming after me. Why am I the target you're aiming for? Why have I become a burden to you? I don't understand what it is that I have done that's so wrong. And then he says in verse 21, why do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? If I have done something wrong, why don't you forgive me? For now I shall lie in the earth. You will seek me, but I shall not be. Because at the pace I'm going to die. And this is something that comes out in the Psalms quite a bit, when the psalmist will say to God, Look, God, if you don't rescue me, I'm going to die. And if I die, is the dust going to praise you? At least if you let me live, I'll live my life in worship and praise and honor of you. And so it seems that Job is falling right in that same type of thinking. I mean, you let me die, well, you just lost somebody who's going to do good on the earth, who's going to continually serve you and promote you to other people. So you can see he's frustrated with it all, and understandably so. All right. Any questions or anything on not just that chapter, I guess, but even Eliphaz's speech and then Job's response to it in 6 and 7? Okay. Job 8, we're going to turn to Bildad and let him talk for a minute. To kind of set the scene for Bildad, let's see here. Have you ever dealt with someone who gives overly simplistic answers? It's like they have this view of the world, and it is so set and so structured that they cannot deviate from it. They cannot expand it. Like those lines have no fluidity. There's no room for like stretching them and growing. Everything is right here, and if it doesn't fit my way of talking about this, then I'm just going to dismiss it all. And listen, this is a very real danger. And I see it a lot in a lot of different religious people. And I'm not here just talking about suffering. I'm talking about biblical interpretation just in general. To where a group finds an issue and they dig in on it, and there is no moving from it. Even though good, solid evidence and reason tells them they should not dig in. They stick with it. And look, we're not exempt from that. We're not exempt from that. To where, let me give you a simple discussion where people can dig in and they end up torturing what the text of Scripture is saying. I've known a lot of people in churches of Christ, and I've obviously grown up there, and I've listened to I don't know how many thousands of sermons in my life. And I've heard a lot of teaching on baptism and other things, all of which, obviously, I am for. I tend to believe that I believe what the Bible says about the subject. But you know, I have heard some people in trying to explain baptism versus a view of justification that says all you have to do is mentally believe and assent. I have seen some people try and defend baptism to the point where they negated faith. And if we don't recognize the problem in that, we have a problem. You see, the argument kind of goes, well, the faith, no, you got to be baptized. Faith, no, that's no. Christianity is a system of faith from beginning to end. The answer is not putting baptism against faith. That's not the answer. The Bible doesn't do that. Okay? The answer is understanding how the two things work together. That's the answer. But if you dig in and you're more concerned with trying to prove a point to someone than you are about actually arriving at what the Bible actually says, you'll end up hurting people, and you'll end up being disrespectful to God because you won't handle what He has said correctly, and I won't handle it correctly. So, what Bildad here is, I understand we're talking about suffering, we're talking about all those different things, but what Bildad shows us is he's got this understanding of something, and he can't deviate from it. And he is going to stick to it and argue it to the point where he doesn't listen to what anybody is saying. And that's one of the things that really all of these friends have in common, is that they don't listen to what Job is actually saying. So, in the first 10 verses of the book, or of the chapter, he lays out basically his argument. It says, "Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, 'How long will you say these things, and the words of your mouth be a great wind?'" How long are you going to keep talking hot air? Okay? How long are you going to keep going? Now, this is something that's characteristic. Eliphaz says something similar. He's not as worked up as Bildad is. Bildad's worked up at this point. And so this comes to, I think this is an important point about learning to listen. You see, Bildad is so worked up by listening to Job that it appears that he just immediately jumps in to respond. So here's the question. He's hearing something that disagrees with his understanding of the world. Job is saying he's suffering and yet he's innocent. Bildad's understanding of the world won't let him believe that. Okay? So here he is. He's got this guy saying, "I'm suffering, but I didn't do anything wrong," and Bildad's blood is just boiling. There's no way that's possible. You're denying, you're denying, you're denying. And then he moves in to respond. Now look, just because somebody says something that I disagree with doesn't mean I'm right. And that's a point a lot of times we can't get. It doesn't mean I'm right. If what they are saying does make my blood boil, then I need to calm myself down and say, wait a minute, am I upset because it feels like they're attacking me, or am I upset because I can't really analyze what they're saying and find a right answer to it? And what can happen is you've got a person who's stating a point, and we're sitting here listening, and we're not listening to try and understand what they're saying. We're listening simply to respond to what they're saying. You know the difference in that, right? It usually starts off with, yeah, you're about ready to talk. They're almost done, and you're talking over the end of them, and you, oh yeah? No, we're not interested in having these discussions, and I'm just going to call that, and it's very easy to do. Somebody gets up and they make their point in their rant, and so what you do in response is, whew, man, is it hot in here? Because all that hot air was blowing. That's a sure sign of disrespect. It's just a sure sign of disrespect. And Bildad begins that way. I mean, it's a sheer sign of disrespect. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter. Listen, if a person thinks that a circle is the shape of a square and they legitimately believe that, I can tell you, me mocking them won't help them understand it. And so there are these little things that are embedded in this text that are showing massive mistakes that lead to what God at the end of Job says, look, you did not, he says to the friends, you did not speak about me what was right. You did not represent me. And so here is the basis of his theology, and then we'll be done. He says, does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? So in essence, after listening to Job saying that I'm suffering, but I didn't do anything wrong, man, this is so common. He hears what Job is not saying. He hears what Job is not saying. Job has never once said that God is unjust. Not once. Not once. And the first words out of his mouth after he insults the man are, well, you think God's perverting justice. Where in the world did you get that from? That's not what I said. When we're listening to what people are saying, we need to actually deal with what people are saying. Not my interpretation of what you said, but making sure I understand what you say. Because what we're doing then is called a straw man argument, and we'll close on this. So a straw man argument is this. Here I am. I believe something. I state what I believe. I state I believe baptism is for the remission of sins. Somebody comes along and says, okay, I'm not actually going to talk about what you said. I'm actually going to make a straw man. I'm going to create an image, a caricature of what you believe. I'm going to make a straw man. Which is, when I say baptism is for the remission of sins, they say, well, what you say is that faith does not matter. Did I say that? Did I say that? And then they spend all their time talking about all the verses that discuss faith is essential to salvation. Hey, I agree with you, buddy. But you see, a straw man is where you mischaracterize the person you're talking to. You mischaracterize them, you create a caricature, and you attack the caricature instead of dealing with what the person actually says. And we do it in all kinds of relationships. We do it all over the board. And that's Bildad's big mistake. You can almost see Job. I mean, if the man had a watch, I know I would be. I'd be, you done yet? Because this, I mean, it's not what I said. So, we'll pick up thinking about it and move into his response, hopefully next week.